Hello, everyone. The blooper today is a cafeteria sign from Denmark, which said, and Danes, please forgive my horrible pronunciation, but it says, broccoli salat met erwtenskud och salte mandler, which basically translates into English, which was underneath the sign, broccoli salad with pea shoots and salted almonds, which makes perfect sense, except that pea shoots was spelled P-E-E. Not terribly advertising in that way. And this is exactly why, again, as a reminder that you need a professional language agency to check anything done by AI or anything done by any amateurs to make sure that it is done correctly so that you don't become a blooper on one of our podcasts. So today's guest is Tim Van Mieghan. Tim is the co-founder of the ProAction Group, a Chicago-based consultancy that revitalizes stale or stagnant private equity companies in the US and abroad to dramatically increase their productivity. Since 1995, he has personally worked in over 100 private equity firms and 700 operating companies, focusing on manufacturing, supply chain management, and commercial operations such as pricing, processing, and sales. Overseas, Tim has worked in Mexico, Brazil, Guatemala, China, Indonesia, and the UK. His firm also operates in Eastern Europe, and he is the author of the book, Shocking Profit: How to Discover Your Company's Hidden Value. Welcome, Tim. Delighted that you're with us today.
Thank you, Philip. Glad to be here.
Okay. So let's start by your telling us a bit about your background and how you acquired your expertise in both profitability improvement, as well as how you gained your international experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be glad to. I'm going to go back to my college days, and I promise I won't take forever to go through this, but I'm an accountant. I'm actually a CPA, and in one of the accounting classes or functions, remember we had a partner come in from, I think it was Arthur Andersen at the time, and talked about the profit improvement practice. And oh my, I remember seeing stars at that time, and I knew that was my interest. And sure enough, I did go in and I became an auditor at Arthur Andersen. I did one audit, and then I was able to get myself on that operational consulting team. And I will tell you, Philip, I went from, how many hours left today to I didn't care if it was Monday or Saturday, because we got to go in and we were, you got to connect with people and figure out how to, essentially make their jobs easier, more effective, help the company succeed, which it was much more energizing. So from that time forward, I was able to focus in that area, did a lot of work in supply chain. And part of the passion that came with that was to actually have a result, to get to the point where a sustainable change was made with the client, not just a beautiful, thoughtful report that might sit on a shelf. And that really drove our practice. And as we evolved over the years, and this is how I like to think of it, though, as we worked with our clients and kind of demonstrated that we come in, understand the situation, help them achieve that future state. Then we were asked to, hey, if you did this work in supply chain, can you do this work on inventory? And we've got this plant over here, and we're having some issues with forecasting and supply planning and so on and so forth. So that's the medium version of the story.
Excellent. And then how did you acquire your international expertise?
It's similar. Most of our clients are US-based private equity firms, but people always ask me, we're based in Chicago. Do we do all of our work in Chicago? The answer is no. And the reason is even if we focused on private equity firms only in Chicago, their portfolio companies have operations all over the place, and as you know, a growing percentage of the companies have global operations, global customers, global suppliers. So we got pulled into it, and it's been a fascinating expansion of the journey out, I would say.
Yeah. It's a wonderful way to transition into it just through your clients. How appropriate.
Yes.
How wonderful.
Yes.
Your firm, in essence, are what I would call change managers or transformation managers. And change is difficult in any culture or country. What methods do you use to implement these transformations? And the other aspect is that you're coming in as Americans or outsiders or foreigners, and basically you're telling these client companies what to do and how to do it. So how do you establish trust with your in-country staff?
What a great question, Philip. And there's a couple things I think about. There's 3 steps in a sense to getting a new reality in place: awareness, acceptance, and action.
Mm.
And we have spent a lot of our time on those first 2 areas. First, on awareness. Awareness, unresolved problems do not get solved. And unrecognized potential does not get tapped. People, we don't work on things if we're not aware of them. And that sounds obvious. And to some degree, I'm being Captain Obvious right now, but it starts there. It has to start with awareness, which requires competence, and it also requires a level of curiosity. And this really does tie in with your question on change management. First and foremost, we go in with a strong sense of curiosity and a very healthy sense of respect and appreciation. And here's what I mean by that. I remember hearing stories about big improvements, and we've had some of our own stories, and people often ask, God, how in the heck was that possible? Like, how come they didn't know? And you know what? Here's the answer. It's totally makes sense that they didn't know. A lot of companies here, for example, are dedicated to their workers, and they look for opportunities to promote from within. And we've worked at many companies where their people had been there for 30 years, 40 years. They know what they know. And obviously they don't know what they don't know. And so they've responded to the leadership that they've been given, the tools that they've been given, the resources that they've been given. And they've done the best they can with that. And what we have found is there's that foundation is there, and they're very good people doing what they've been asked to do so far. So when we go in, our first thing, and this is so critical for change management, is to understand what they're doing today and why. We acknowledge and we give honest compliments when we can about what they're doing well. And Philip, you'll appreciate this too. A lot of times, the things that we can compliment them on are also things that we want to end or finish. For example, one of the most common compliments that we can honestly provide on a company is the dedication of their people to serving their customers.
Hmm.
And every day people come in and they're expediting, they're firefighting, they're doing whatever they can, and they take it personally that their customers are going to get their product when they promised it. And that should not be that hard. 80 to 90% of all production and all orders should flow through the system without anybody having to make a big judgment call. So it's an honest, good compliment, but it's also an acknowledgement that there's an opportunity to improve. The second thing that we do after, so we learn what they do. We don't come in with a solution to start with. And that's really difficult. If, for example, we do a lean manufacturing or Six Sigma quality sourcing or supply chain projects, but we don't go in with an assumption that the tool is the right approach, any specific tool. It really has to start with just simply understanding where they are, what they're doing. And here's one reason for that. Many times their understanding of their problem is dissecting a symptom, not the root cause. So up front, when we think about awareness, we're able to focus on understanding the real root cause issues that are going on, and we're connecting with their people. And we're connecting with them to listen, to hear them, not to give advice, not to judge. Okay. And Philip, any culture that you're in, it needs to start with that. People need to feel heard, and we need to be accurate, and good at raising awareness of either opportunities or risks that need to be addressed. As we go from that to acceptance, there's a few things. The first one is that we do build it on that foundation of listening and hearing them and making sure they feel heard. And that leads to us providing our observations. And we've kind of broken it down into 3 types of observations that really help lay the groundwork for change and acceptance that change is good and necessary. The first one, as I've mentioned, is we acknowledge what they do well today. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whatever you do, don't stop these things because they're very good and you're a high-performing company in these areas. The second set is one that I feel it's almost like a hidden secret to do this. And it's so powerful and important. It's to acknowledge their constraints and the uniqueness of their situation. And here's what I mean. And it's actually kind of an old consulting joke that people would tell. Consultants would tell when consultants get around and they're standing around the water cooler and they're talking about the people who don't listen to them. They say, it's so annoying. I talk to somebody, I explain what we do. I'm like, wow, that's really good. You really help people. I know 5 different companies who need your help. I'm like, thank you. That's great. But what about your company? And they're like, oh, no, you don't understand. We're different. We've got crazy clients. We're a job shop. Everything's custom. We have long lead times. We have, regulations. And what we do, it's really important to do this, is to show them that we hear and heard them and understand what's unique about their situation. Mm. Letting in the US, this big deal. It's a union shop. It's a custom. Every job is different. We have very long lead times from our suppliers. Whatever it is, we have to get it out there on the table that we hear it and understand it, and this has to become part of whatever solution we're going to talk about. Only after those 2 types of observations do we then go into the observations that indicate the opportunity to improve. These are not recommendations, they're observations. And when we've gone through the strengths and the constraints first, we find that typically people are more ready to hear the observations. And a lot of times too, we're previewing this with different people in different departments so they understand it, and there's nothing in there that either we're wrong, we misinterpreted something, or they have something to share on it. So there's a lot of important legwork to do to stay connected with people. Another key piece is to have people become part of the solution. So another interesting thing people will say when I tell them I'm a consultant is like, yeah, we've had a few of those come in, and they're really frustrating because they come in, they interview us, we tell them all of our ideas, then they go present them to the board and get paid a whole bunch of money, and then the company listens to them. And I'm like, you're mostly right. I said, we do exactly what you're talking about. We come in and we do interview everybody, and we do take your ideas. And here's the parts that I'll add to it, though. Out of the 10 ideas we present to the board, 8 of them came from you. And 2 of them came from our experience with other companies and whatever else we've had. However, you gave us 38 ideas. We presented the 8 that make sense and that work. We did the math. We went and built a business case around it. What's the cost benefit analysis? How complicated is it to implement? How long will it take? Do we have the bandwidth to do it? Will it work? And we connect with everybody to explore it, as we go through it and build the case. That process is very important. And when we do present those 10 ideas, the 8 that their people gave us, we do everything in our power to make sure everybody knows who gave us who presented the idea. We are not there to take, right?
That's fantastic. I'm curious, when you work in a country like Brazil or China, do you work through interpreters?
Yes. So sometimes the interpreters are employees who happen to be bilingual. But as you can expect, Philip, that is an issue here in the United States as well. In fact, in some cases, it's more complicated because there's plants we work in where there's 3 or 4 different languages being spoken throughout the plant. And so, in one sense, it's certainly more complex when we have an interpreter working with us. But I view it as an extension. If you think about what we've been discussing so far, this is all about people being heard, and also about us listening and finding the real answers. Like, we're not there to prove our hypothesis. We're there to find the data and develop an hypothesis. So the issue of the language barrier is really an extension of something that exists, even if we all speak the same language.
Huh.
How often are we in a conversation where nobody's hearing anything anymore? Right?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah,
all the time.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Can you give some examples of some stories where things worked and where things didn't work?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be glad to. One of my here's one that's a favorite of mine. This was a client that has their investment thesis was to buy a whole bunch of branded companies that have high-end consumer products, and they converted, or they moved all the manufacturing and assembly of these items to their own factory in Southeast Asia, in China. And they had 26 different brands, and they had about a 4 to 5 month lead time from the time at which the operating brand or the operating company sent the order to China, then to have it go through their planning process, get the materials, get it scheduled in the plant, then to run it, then to stage it, ship it, and get it to the operating company, was a 4 to 5 month process. And what was really fun about this was doing the analysis. First and foremost, we're looking at inventory levels in the United States, and we found that the problem is you're treating your own department, your own internal manufacturing plant, like it's a third-party supplier, where you're collecting your data throughout the month on what you need. At the end of the month, you place an order with your supplier, so to speak, of what you need. They throw it into their pool of items they have to schedule and buy components for and everything. And then it's in that pool for a week to 6 weeks before it gets made. And we were able to identify the impact if we instead treated that manufacturing plant like it's our own company, which it is. It's an extension of our company. And instead of placing formal orders at the end of every month, we actually set up we called it a block schedule, where we took all these SKUs that all the different companies needed and put them on a schedule to make them every week. And then each week, each company would send their actual demand that week for those items. And that's how much the manufacturing company would actually produce the following week. The concept is very good and simple. And I'll give you the dramatic result first. The dramatic result first was we took that 4 to 5 month lead time, made it 6 weeks.
So this is just-in-time manufacturing.
It is, and it is. And if we think about the size of the prize, here's what that meant, and here's what it looked like. What it looked like is on Friday, each store or each company would tally up their demand for that week and just email it to the company. They would use those numbers to update and prepare their schedule for the next week. They'd make the product by the end of the next week. Then the following week, it's on the water. That's the 6 weeks. Okay. It dramatically, not only did the lead time was great. And what it meant was their forecasting before that, the company forecasts that were less than 4 months were irrelevant. You had to start your forecast 4 months out,
right,
because that's how long it took. And we were able to get that back not only to 6 weeks, but you also knew exactly what was coming in. And every week you had a little bit of inventory arriving. So it was now a flow instead of, the image of the snake, having to swallow something bigger than itself and digest it over a month, But the question you asked,
in what country was this manufacturing? Sorry?
in China. In China. Yes. And the part you asked about on making, the change management component, there's a couple pieces. The first one was with the leadership team was to define the size of the prize. It was first to help them to understand what the impact would be if you were to, change the flow and how our departments, our companies work together to overcome the inertia, right? That's there. No one's going to want to change on its own. People don't want to change. It's scary. So defining the size of the prize got it on the table. They're like, okay, this is important. We want to do it. And then when we got into into China, it was very much part of it, I think, was the personality of our team, our consultant, and our approach, which was first and foremost to look and see what they were doing today, to make sure they knew that we understand how they work today. And then we brought them through why we were there and going to work on this new approach. And we literally did it with them. Our consultant wasn't in a boardroom, wasn't in the conference room. He was on the shop floor showing them exactly how to do it. And he was there for months doing it day in and day out until it was just second nature with them.
That's wonderful. That's often a very effective method, of course. Are there any projects that did not work? Perhaps that you recommended something that wasn't appropriate?
I'll give you I'll share one like that. I also want to share one that was appropriate, but it was so painful. We had another client that shipped large projects. They would be hired to do projects to set up custom equipment all around the world. And most of that equipment came from Chicagoland area. And every time they got a new project, they would go out and solicit bids from freight forwarders to handle the freight. And when we got a chance to take a look at their process, we noticed that for a company their size, they're paying dramatically over market. And they were using the precious lead time that they had to negotiate contracts instead of to plan the move. They're negotiating with different providers, different freight forwarders, to see who's going to get the business instead of having an approach where they could award the business and then they're actually working on, what are our options to consolidate loads or to use less expensive freight options? Can we ship this on a slow boat versus air freight, or whatever it might be if we plan it well. And It was, so we took the client through the negotiating process, which was dramatic. And I think you can understand this. They had been doing business a certain way for decades.
Right.
Even though they put things out to bid, there were people that were consistently winning. They were used to that. A lot of strong relationships. And so going through the process of negotiating, of giving everybody a fair chance and managing the communications was a complex situation, and it really highlighted the importance of taking a formal approach. And here's what I mean by that. When we actually, when the team came out with their decision, holy cow, there was a tidal wave of anger, frustration, surprise from different people in different camps of how could we choose them? And at the end of the day, if we couldn't prove and demonstrate everything we did, show them the numbers, the comparisons, the work we did to give every single supplier the same information and chance to win the business, it would have been dead in the water. Anytime you want to make something complex, you want to change something that's complex with multiple stakeholders, it's so tempting to say, I know the right answer, let's just go do it. But when you go from awareness to action without stopping at acceptance, it's like trying to go from first base to third base without touching second. It's never going to work. You're going to get thrown out every single time. So that part actually worked. The part where it became hard was the transition, and going from the people that had been doing the work to the new providers that won the work. The pain, the I'll call it tribal knowledge, the things that people knew to do because they'd been doing it, but they didn't even realize it was important. It wasn't documented. It was not, in a process somewhere. And this was a big company, billions of dollars in sales. They didn't, there was things like this. So when we switched to new providers, there was a lot of pain, a lot of relearning. And when you asked if something didn't work, the part that didn't work was it was way more painful than it needed to be, and our client was unprepared for it. So what we could have done better there is to say up front, here's what you can expect. This is going to be painful. It's going to take, you're going to have to relearn things because we're changing out the people. So don't be surprised. It's going to get harder before it gets better. But at the end of the day, it turned out to be wildly successful, just a painful transition.
Fascinating. And in what country was that company located?
That one, what I'm talking about now, truly was global. We ended up with service providers that handled South America, Southeast Asia, Europe. So it was truly North America. So it was we were bringing together many different departments and divisions.
Very interesting. You raised the issue of global. When you've worked in a developing country like Guatemala and Indonesia, do you have certain challenges or issues that arise that do not happen in the developed world, such as the UK or Eastern Europe?
So yeah, there are some things, and I want to say yes and no. Yes, there are things that we have to deal with that we don't specifically have to deal with in the United States or in Europe. But I would also say this, that every client we go to, there are things that we have to hear them, we have to pay attention, we have to understand where they are today. We have to connect with them where they are, not where we are, where we want them to be. And so, something like, for example, in Guatemala, things like, assumptions we might make about, and this is true in the United States, literacy. Do people speak the same language? Can they see? Can they read it? What are the norms for absenteeism, for showing up on time for a shift every single day? But if I bring up the topics that we might have to pay attention to in a developing country, and I don't tell you we're talking about a developing country, a lot of my friends would say, yeah, you're talking about different parts of the US, because we have the same issues here, you know, that and anytime we're to make a change sustainable, Philip, we have to view it as a culture change, not just a change of process. We have to get people used to this new approach, comfortable with it, and it needs to become the new, kind of rote
Yeah.
muscle memory process.
You mean a corporate culture change?
Yes. Yes, and very often, many of our clients are what I would call they're transitioning from entrepreneurially run to scalable companies,
Hmm.
and so very, very often we're helping our clients go from a culture where the leader is the chief producer and they're sort of the conductor telling everybody, making sure everybody's doing the right thing, to a scalable company where the CEO is focused on strategy, acquisitions, huge customer sales, or playing golf, whatever. But they're not making sure orders get out the door or that we're doing a good job serving our clients. Right. Right. That is a huge culture change.
Hmm.
And many times when we're getting involved, part of what we're doing is helping the company allow people in each department to own that department, to own their part of the world or their part of the supply chain.
Very interesting. Yeah. What projects have been the most difficult for you to implement over your career?
I'll start with this, and this might not be a totally fair answer, but it is absolutely true. It's the project where the CEO is reluctant.
Reluctant or interferes or both?
I want to think about that. Both, I'm sure, but reluctant. I would rather have a CEO who's fighting me and engaged and honestly thinks we're doing the wrong thing, because data and logic and everything else will win out. What I really struggle with is more the passive aggressive. They're just reluctant, whether they're doing it because they were told to do it, they're doing it because their backs up against a wall or whatever. At the end of the day, I'll say this: we're not making anything up, Philip. We're not coming up with new processes or principles. This is how I like to think about it. We take, what does Toyota do well, or GE or Emerson Electric, take Danaher, and that's where most of our consultants came from, is companies like that. There's principles there that make business work well. We're simply applying those principles in different situations, in different countries, in different companies, and all that. So what we're doing, this is going to sound arrogant, but I promise you it's not, because they're not my ideas.
Hmm.
It works. It works every single time. We are never wrong. But the reason we're never wrong is because we're not going in and making up and doing what's in our judgment. We're going in and applying a principle that's been tried and true and proven over and over and over again. So the worst thing we run into is a CEO that has not yet bought in. That's probably where I'd start.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense, really. And you're right, the principles that you're saying are very logical and ethical and moral and true, because it's all about listening to people and then implementing what they're telling you.
Exactly. Like today, just recently came up with this. This came up in a discussion with a client where the prospective owner of this one company walked through and saw that there was a lot of scrap coming off the line, and she asked, what's going on here? This is a food manufacturing company. And they asked what was going on. And they said, like, well, we noticed these weren't perfect and we don't want it to get to a client. So we're throwing it away. And in the one sense, it's very laudable and very good that the workers care, and two, the company is paying attention to it. But what does it tell you if we're inspecting in quality? Okay, that's what's happening. They're inspecting it in, they're sorting. At the end of the product's all been made. We've got the raw materials in there. We've done all the conversion. We maybe have even packaged it, and now we're throwing it away. The principle here is you design quality in, right? So we're not making up that this is a big opportunity. It's been there all the time. And again, we recognize people are doing the best they can with the direction and resources they've been given. When we get the chance to work through it and show them and do it with them, it'll work.
Are there any of your methods that do not apply in the developing world, for example?
That's a really good question. And I'll think about this as we're talking, but I am going to say no. And for this reason, it's the way I think about our processes and procedures. Specific tools may be less or more relevant, in a specific country, in a specific situation. But at the end of the day, our approach is to go in and understand where they are today and what's happening today and raise awareness. The second part is acceptance, where we take what we saw and first we define the size of the prize, which is, like, I'll say it this way, the opportunity to improve. They say the room for improvement is the biggest room in the world. It's true. In a sense, the ability to improve is almost, pie in the sky. It's okay, thanks, that's really helpful kind of thing. It's what's the return on investment or the return on the effort to improve? If we improve in this area or that area, what's the impact? So we define that helps to provide the leadership team an understanding of how important is it, how much should we invest in time, in resources, and effort to address this issue. And when the issue's important enough, it's a problem worth solving or a vision worth pursuing, then we get that support and that action, and we're able to continue gaining the buy-in from the company. And that again comes back to working through the topics, educating, getting feedback, making people part of the process. When you look at it at that level, Philip, the approach we take works everywhere. It always has to start there.
That's very interesting. I was asking the question because in many cultures, especially in the developing world and Southeast Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, and so forth, people are programmed not to criticize authority. India is another very major example. And the boss tells you you do it a certain way, you don't question the boss. So what you're saying, though, is that you're listening to people and they do tell you what they really think.
Yeah. And let me go take that a little bit further, Philip. And this is why expertise is important. Okay. You need two things, I think, to be an excellent consultant and to help people make the right change, even when it's difficult. The first one is you have to be technically competent. Truly, you have to know. You have to be able to read the situation and understand what's right. The second thing you have to be able to do is lead without authority. You can't, if you're the person who says, I'm the boss, you got to do what I'm saying, you can't be a consultant. You'll get laughed out of town every single time. So I want people to feel heard, but we also don't need people to tell us what's going on. We look at actually how do they set up the line? How are they running the line? We watch it flow. We look at how it's scheduled. We look at how how do people know if they're winning or losing on the line? How do they know if they're doing a good job? Are there metrics or not metrics? We're not going to go up to somebody and say, does your boss do a good job of telling you whether you're doing good or not? Right. We're not going to ask them for we will ask people for their opinion, but we're not going to rely on them feeling free to give it to us. Because even in, I was laughing when you asked the question, because I was part of a conversation one time where at one client we were talking about whether this one executive was a good executive to work with or not. And we asked one of their colleagues, and the colleague was being very evasive, didn't want to say negative. And I remember saying, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Well, how about if we have them work on this project with you?" And that person, no, 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 no. It was like guttural. They almost wanted to pull it back in as soon as they said it, because they felt like they were hurting somebody else by sharing it. So in one sense, there's always the issue, but that's why you can't send someone with, good intention and the right questions to do this type of work. You have to send someone who, uh, you know, they've run the plant, they've run the supply chain, they've run the company, they know it. This is something the ProAction started 27 years ago. About 25 years ago, we changed our model from hiring young, smart people and teaching them to be consultants to hiring people that have deep knowledge and experience in doing the work. And I'll tell you, I am so grateful that we figured that one out, because you never have to explain to someone why your price is what your price is, when the people who go in know exactly what to do. And think about this too, Philip, it's a vulnerable time for people when they're going from something that they know to something they don't know. And oftentimes things like lean manufacturing and even supply chain can be counterintuitive.
Hmm.
Like here's an example of one that's really common. Everybody knows that downtime is bad. It's not, in a sense, it's not good, because when you're not running the machine, you're not making any money. So intuitively, people think, well, we should go for long runs. We want to set the machine up and have it go. But that's not true. Or I shouldn't say it's not necessarily true. What we're here to do is to fill orders, to satisfy demand, not to reduce the unit cost of each part. And so we're asking them in many cases, hey, you guys change over once a week now. We're going to change over 3 times a day going forward. And like, you're nuts. But the only way to do it is we have to be there and walk them through, and then they see what happens and like, oh, I get it. Okay. But until you see it, it's hard to conceptualize.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Is there anything else you'd like to add briefly before we close?
One, I really appreciate the chance to talk about this, and I'll say this: it's that the simplicity of the idea of thinking about awareness, acceptance, then action is, all 3 of those are so vitally important. Awareness is critical because think of the number of times that you walk into a situation and what people tolerate.
Yes.
Yeah. Philip, do you know what our number one indicator of opportunity is when we walk through a plant? Stress. When we feel angry, frustrated, short with each other, where they don't have eye contact with their supervisors or the CEO when they walk through, we don't know exactly what the cause of it is, but we know that there's a ton of opportunity.
So stress.
There's a problem. Yeah. And here's the thing, they all know it's stressful, but they live with it. They just got used to it.
Yes.
So this awareness piece is really critical to bring in, to go in with a good eye, an open ear, and somebody who's been through it once or twice, so that you can actually get like you can hear what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Very
And
interesting.
then yeah, and then the acceptance piece we've talked about. It's so tempting to go from awareness to action, but you got to plant the seeds before you can harvest the corn.
Very
You've
true.
got to get a chance to absorb it, to come to terms with it, to challenge you, to tell you you're wrong, and to work through it before you can honestly expect the action to take hold.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you, Tim. This has been an absolutely fascinating interview and tremendous insights from you. And greatly appreciate your joining us today. And I hope all of our listeners will join us again next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.